Hello, and welcome to the virtual What is Title IX training. So, Title IX at Spelman comprises of four people. Dr. Jeray Mazik, she's been with us for about 2.5 years now, and she oversees everything Title IX related at Spelman's campus. Myself, I'm Kristen Couch. I serve as the Associate Director for Title IX and Compliance, and I've been with the college closer to 5 years now. Paula Dobbs, who is our program or project director for the Violence Prevention and Intervention Program. And we'll touch on that program just a little bit later in hopes to share with you just some initiatives that we've got going on around the campus. Last but not least is Michaela Hare. She's our Outreach and Education Coordinator. She's also a Spelman alum. So she's helped us with brainstorming different outreach ideas for the community, not just for students, but also faculty and staff. In our office, Paula and I do a lot of work around case management. So, meaning that if somebody is in need of support after something has happened or something that has occurred, we're the people in the office who are the main points of contact to provide ongoing support for a matter. Folks who submit a report will meet with Dr. Mazik for an intake, but by definition, being her as a Title IX coordinator, she is supposed to remain neutral. Therefore, she doesn't do a lot of case management for ongoing support, but she is open to having discussion. With that said, I just want to remind folks that while we are at an institution of undergraduate students, our office doesn't just support students, we support faculty and staff as well. And yeah, we can show you or talk with you about what some of our services are as we move through the training. But I say that to say, if someone is interested in having a conversation with us, whether something happened recently or maybe happened historically, right? Maybe something has occurred prior to our arrival at Spelman, we're here to help and we want to support. So just for some goals today, we're going to talk about what Title IX is and how it applies to Spelman. We're also going to talk about some policy violations that people can report to our office. We'll also discuss reporting, disclosing, and what getting support looks like on our campus. And then we'll briefly look at the complaint resolution process, which we already started, so to speak. And then we'll go to the OBW grants, which funds Paula's program, the Violence Prevention and Intervention Program, also referred to as VP&I. So with Title IX, we talk a lot about gender-based discrimination, right? And so gender-based discrimination does include violence under Title IX. So things like sexual assault, relationship violence, stalking, even gender-based harassment or discrimination. So I say that to say, I hope that you take care of yourself during this training. If you need to pause, if you need to speak with one of us directly in order to complete it, if you are just interested in learning what support can look like for you, we're happy to meet with you. We are more than willing to support. Again, we don't just support our students, we support the Spelman community. So the big question is, what is Title IX? And Title IX is only about 30 plus words as it's defined. But as time has gone on, as the culture, society has evolved, that's expanded to more than just really. So Title IX initially started off with like the conversation around athletics. So women having the same access to resources, opportunities, and initiatives um, as men would. So instead of the men having more elaborate or having more accessible opportunities for sports, making sure that is also equitable or the same for women athletes. But what we know now is as time has moved on, as again, as things have evolved, that also can apply to that same principle, can apply to a lot of different areas. So pregnancy and parenting folks, um, access to STEM programs, right? Um, but also things like gender-based violence. And under Title IX and under our regulations, gender-based violence is considered um, discriminatory because of a whole host of different reasons. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But by definition, Title IX is basically says that no institution receiving federal financial assistance is allowed to discriminate or exclude anyone based on their sex. So, what does prohibited conduct look like? So, these are some of the policy violations that you'll find in our sexual misconduct policy, which is on our Spelman's website under Title IX. And we encourage you all just to take a look. Sometimes folks don't necessarily know what has occurred or how to define what's happened to them. And the policy itself can help with some language around that. Our policy goes into more depth around sexual assault and what that looks like, how that manifests. And stalking is something that's also expanded on in our policy as well. And what we'll do is we're going to go through these policy violations. And again, I encourage you to take care of yourself. And if you need some support after the fact, please let us know. So, what you'll find in our policy is that sexual harassment can be categorized under two buckets, right? So, quid pro quo is which you think about a power dynamic. So, if sexual harassment is any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, what I mean by power dynamic is there has to be a power differential, meaning professor conditioning a student to engage in some unwanted or unwelcome sexual activity in order for them to pass this class. In the employment sector, it might look like a supervisor conditioning their supervisee or their employee um, to engage in some kind of unwelcome conduct in order for them to get a raise, to get a positive performance review, to get that promotion that they've been seeking. So we want to keep that in mind. The context of things is really important, and power differentials can make a lot of difference. Hostile environment doesn't necessarily need the power differential. It's just what's going on in our space that's sufficiently serious enough to interfere with our ability to fully access the spaces that we're in. So if I'm coming into work every day and I'm getting catcalled every time I come in, I'm uncomfortable and I'm a little nervous, right? Maybe I'm questioning my level of safety about coming into work that day. Um, there's no power differential there. These could be my coworkers, right, or colleagues. But what's happening in the environment is reducing my ability and interfering with my ability to fully show up and to fully access my workspace and get my work done. Also considered sexual harassment and sexual assault. And we've talked about that briefly. Um, Under our policy and even in the Title IX regs, we talk about dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. So let's go more into those. Also included in our policy is language around gender-based harassment and discrimination. And a lot of folks might be surprised that this is something that we navigate as a college because this is an all women's institution or women identifying, also known as femme identifying institution. But gender-based harassment and discrimination can occur anywhere, right? Because not all of our students, as they matriculate along, want to identify as a woman or just don't identify as a woman. There are some students who go or refer to themselves as she, them for their pronouns. There's some students who even refer to themselves as he, him. And unwelcome conduct that's typically repeated and offensive that makes someone who is maybe not adhering to the gender norms, so to speak. Anything that looks like forms of harassment, forms of aggression, things that look like threats can be addressed under our office. So, in practicality, I think of two examples. So, mispronouncing someone, not referring to someone as the pronouns that they've told us that they refer to by or go by. So if I say that my pronouns are they, them, but someone continues to refer to me as she, her, that's mispronouncing. Even after I've had the discussion, even if I've made a mistake, I can say, hey, actually, I just want to remind you, um, especially if I've said this more than once, my pronouns are they, them. If it continues, though, that can create a hostile environment for that person, right? Because it's disrespectful. They may not appreciate being referred to as she, her, especially if they've done the work in trying to express how they express, or yeah, how they express, how they show up in the world. Another example is dead naming. Dead naming is when someone is referred to by their given name versus the name that they have asked us to go by. So, again, me as an example. If my birth name, my given name is Kristen, but if I say I want to go by Chris, or actually my name is Chris, and someone continues to refer to me as Kristen, that's considered dead naming. And again, we're all human. We do make mistakes. But if someone has already said that these things bother us or has called your attention that there's something different here, continuing to refer to someone as their given name can also create a hostile environment. Now, some folks are concerned about, what if I make a mistake? What if, I didn't mean to, or I'm still learning, I'm still processing, right? There's space for growth, and there's space to make mistakes. And typically that looks like having a conversation and talking it through and helping folks to understand why this is so important and why this is so relevant to our community today. We don't want to cause harm, and some folks don't come in intentionally causing harm, but we learn, we grow, and we matriculate. However, we also want folks to know, even if we don't understand, please lead with respect. Otherwise, this can also be considered a Title IX report. And we do offer training. It's called Spell Safe, and everyone in our campus community is invited. We do provide lunch. We do provide resources for folks who want to expand their knowledge base on this. And we typically do it twice a year, one in the spring and one in the fall, for folks who are just curious around how privilege shows up in the Black community and how that privilege can show up as it relates to discrimination and harassment of folks in the LGBTQ community. Relationship violence is also something that we navigate within our community, right? So in our policy, it talks about domestic violence and dating violence, and there is a difference between the two. With dating violence, this is a social relationship of a romantic nature. And this could be two people who live in separate spaces, who don't have a child together, who haven't even been married before, but they've agreed to be in a relationship or have some context of a relationship. Domestic violence requires that that former or current spouse or intimate partner. This person can also, and this dynamic can also involve family violence with a parent and a child, right? And maybe there is a child in the mix of two people in a relationship. Maybe they live together at some point, or they just cohabitated. This is how domestic violence shows up. Now, you'll see at the top of your screen is something that we refer to as the cycle of violence. This is a tool that helps us to understand that While relationship violence isn't something that we seek out, if we find ourselves in a violent relationship, these are some of the things that you might expect or maybe can even anticipate. So there's a honeymoon period after something has taken place, and everything's cool, everybody's sorry, it's all, we're going to work at this, we're going to fix this, it's all going to be great. Then there's the tension building phase where no harm or incident has happened just yet, but things are escalating rather quickly. You can feel the tension, you can feel or sense some level of anger. And then there's the explosive phase where violence actually does occur. And then we go back into the honeymoon phase where the person who was the aggressor um, is trying to convince the person who was harmed, I won't do it again. I'm so sorry. Um, if you did this, if you stopped doing this, I would stop being this way, whatever that looks like. But this graphic helps us to understand that it is a cycle. Relationship violence is a cycle, and it can be challenging to get out of if you don't understand the cycle of what you might expect. Um, but even understanding like what's going on in the relationship. Why are we always coming back here in this really unhealthy place? So at the bottom is another graphic that's helpful for folks to identify whether their relationship is healthy, unhealthy, or abusive. This is called the relationship spectrum because it's not always either or. Maybe it started off healthy, but then there was a lack of communication, right? Or a lack of respect for boundaries. Maybe we've gotten to a place where we just have some unhealthy tendencies with one another. Abusive is about the power and control, where one other person is trying to control the other individual. And that doesn't feel good, right? Relationship violence and even sexual violence is not related to how we look or a level of attractiveness to one another. It's about power and control, and one person having interest in controlling the other person, or even thinking of them as a possession, right? That's when things become abusive. Not all relationships are healthy and or abusive. Sometimes they're just unhealthy. Stalking is also a big thing amongst the college community. So technology, be it Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, is becoming a thing now, or is a thing now, um, where people can constantly see or reach out or feel access to each other 24/7 sometimes. And sometimes stalking can look like excessive phone calls. It can look like excessive text messages. It may also be things like sending unwanted gifts. And someone might say, well, if they're sending me a gift, why is that harmful? Why would that cause substantial emotional distress? Well, say if I never gave this person that I was talking to, dating violence, right? In terms of that relationship, but somehow they found out where I worked, somehow they found out where I lived, and they're sending me things all the time. That's unsettling because how or why do you have access to this information? But it's also saying, I can access you whenever I want to, despite you telling me you don't want to talk to me anymore, despite you saying you don't want any unwanted gifts or that you want nothing to do with me. It sends a power dynamic, or it's expressing this level of power and control, even after one person has said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to engage in this relationship that's become violent, or even before becomes violent. Nobody is necessarily trying to engage with the stalker. And sometimes it takes a pattern to notice that this person is doing these things. But that's what stalking is. It's a pattern of things. It's not always the person hiding behind the bush or following us around, although stalking can look like that. But in this day and time, stalking doesn't have to be a physical thing. It can occur over technology. And we do have remedies for that. Sexual exploitation is the non-consensual or abusive sexual advantage of another for someone else's benefit. So if I have a relationship with person A and person A is unaware that I'm taking a recording or that I'm going to send it to someone at some point, that's considered exploitation because I'm taking advantage of the fact that they don't know that I'm doing these things. They don't have the ability to consent to or to not give consent about what I plan to do with this information. Even if we both agree that I'm going to take this video, I'm going to take this photo, but we didn't agree to share it, or we didn't agree that I was able to share it, that is considered still exploitation. And all these examples here give a great idea about how exploitation can look. What we do often talk about is knowingly transmitting some type of STD or STI, even HIV to another person. And that shows up because somebody maybe didn't share that what their status was, what their health status was before engaging in some kind of sexual activity. And again, that's exploitation because we're not giving the other person the ability to consent or engage or not. We just, we're walking into a situation where we know more than they do, right? Especially if we're not communicating. And so then therefore that's taking a sexual advantage in order to gain access, which we may not have if we were completely transparent about what it is that we have or what our status is. Retaliation is also in our policy, and retaliation can look like being intimidated, some form of harassment, adverse speech or action, and even just threats in general. Now, retaliation is when someone who has engaged in our office and is seeking some type of resolution, right? Maybe they're just exploring what their options are, depending on what kind of population that they are a part of, whether that be a student, faculty, staff, contractor. If somebody engages in a process with our office, somebody just engages in a process for resolution, but someone, the respondent, the person who's responding to the complaint, engages in some of these activities here at the bottom, that's considered retaliation because it's somebody trying to either make this person feel bad or maybe even trying to encourage them to drop the matter in and of itself. And that's not fair. Someone who is engaging in our office with our office or any kind of resolution process has the right to go through that process, right? Even if they decide at some point that they don't want to participate anymore, there's no penalty for that. But it's not fair for someone who has been harmed to report that harm and then be harmed for reporting said harm. So we spend time talking to our community about consent. So we talk about this with students, we talk about this with faculty, we talk about this with staff, because consent is such an integral part of gender-based violence, right? And giving people a choice to make some decisions about whether they want to engage in some type of sexual activity or even relationship activity. So simply put, consent is two people agreeing to do the same thing in the same way at the same time. It is affirmative, meaning that just because someone didn't say no doesn't mean that you have consent or that we have consent to engage in whatever activity we want to. Sometimes people are still learning how to say their no, and maybe there's some other things at play that is kind of preventing them from saying no at the moment. We need an affirmative yes, or at least some type of signal that says, I am okay with doing this, and then we should proceed. Consent is based on equal power as well. So if somebody is incapacitated, like they've been drinking, they're asleep, they're under the age, right? or even if they're just in a vulnerable space. That's not based on equal power. If it's just not based on equal power, you need to have, again, to get that affirmative consent, that affirmative yes. Someone can't do that if we are drunk or asleep or vulnerable in some way, especially when we're underage. And in the state of Georgia, under the age of 16. And that's different in every state. But just keeping that in mind when engaging with just people around us, right? Just because we're asleep doesn't mean that we have consent. Even if we've engaged in some kind of sexual activity prior to, that doesn't mean that we have consent in this moment. A choice, everybody should have a choice, right? Nobody should be forced, nobody should be pressured, nobody should give consent or have to give consent under fear. That's not a healthy situation. And it's abusive to take someone's choice away in order to gain access in this particular way. And it's also a process, like we talked about with the equal power. I may have agreed to, we may have agreed to kiss at some point, but we didn't agree to do anything else. So us being able to kiss each other does not warrant then I should be able to A, B, C, and D. It's an ongoing conversation where both parties are aware of what they're looking for and whether they want to engage in this or not. Consent is not given by force. So when consent is absent, like we talked about, and the person is under the age of 16 here in Georgia, that differs with every state. But I would encourage you just to think about that and what that means for the broader society, right? If someone is physically or developmentally disabled, now what we're saying here is that people with disabilities can engage in relationships or sexual activity, and they do. But we're saying here, if somebody does not have the ability or the capacity to give consent due to either their condition, their disability, maybe it's a cognitive thing, maybe they're not able to speak or communicate effectively, if they need constant support from someone else, right? Or they're just not able to provide that, they're not able to provide that answer, yes or no, or even maybe this person is unable to give consent. If someone is severely intoxicated or unconscious, whether that be from drinking alcohol, engaging in some type of other drug, um, I'm hearing that marijuana is can be used or has been used in some sexual assault cases, especially if it has some other things in it. Pills can also be a thing. Molly can be a thing. But the point here is if we can't drive home, if we're not comfortable behind the wheel, or if somebody says that they don't look like they can drive, I would recommend them getting behind the wheel, then this person can't give consent. We are no longer in control of our bodies. And last but certainly not least, when a person says no, that is not a sign to proceed. And we try to tell people that if someone has said no and we still proceed anyway, this is assault. Whether the activity happened prior, maybe it happened a day ago, a week ago, and that went okay at that time. Again, consent is a process. You have to get consent from the beginning to the end, to the next stage, before you can just, before anybody can just access this person in this intimate way. So, what does it look like when somebody wants to report? Anyone can submit a report to our office. Anyone. So, a student, faculty, staff, contractor, even folks who are visitors in our community. Our policy covers all of them. And once we get a report, like we talked a little bit about earlier, Dr. Mazik will meet with this person to get some understanding about what happened, what occurred, and are there any safety concerns that we need to think about, and also some initial supportive measures. Someone might need a SANE exam when a sexual violence has occurred, and maybe they're interested in moving forward with a criminal complaint. And a SANE exam or a sexual assault nurse examination can be really beneficial with that. Folks who are not privileged employees, so folks who are not in the counseling center, health services, or religious life, more specifically the dean of the chapel. Everyone else who does not have or work in these environments are considered non-privileged employees, also known as mandatory reporters. So what we expect from mandatory reporters is if they see something, if they hear something, that they would make a report to our office. It's actually required. And from there, when somebody reports something to you, somebody says, hey, I've actually been harmed in this way and they belong to this community, you can say, hey, I hear you, and I just need you to know that we are a mandatory reporter and we have a mandate that says we need to report it to Title IX. And the person who's being reported about doesn't have to respond to our outreach. But we as a college have an obligation to reach out to them and see what their needs are and seeing what may have transpired so that way we can know what's going on in our community and seeing how we can provide safe measures for folks. What else do I want to say about that? It can be uncomfortable telling folks that we're a mandated reporter, but it can be helpful for them to know, especially if they don't know what they should do or what happens next. And if somebody doesn't want to engage with our office, because that happens, not everybody wants to engage with the Title IX office. We do make resources available for other confidential resources in the community that don't report back to us. And sometimes folks just want support in a different way. Or maybe they're concerned that they don't want, maybe concerns that they don't want their information spread around campus, right? Because it is a smaller community. But it's just something to keep in mind. There are deputy Title IX coordinators on campus, and these folks are folks who work and operate in different environments. So the dean of students might be involved if there's a complaint about a student. We're primarily the ones who work in that environment, but there might be a student conduct matter that arises, right? There is also the director of human resources, who is the deputy Title IX coordinator for staff, right? So in the event that something happens, one second, in the event that something happens and we are, and it involves a staff member, Bernadette or Ms. Cohen can then come in and say, well, this is how our resolution process looks like. And this is what it means for staff to provide resolution and what steps we need to take. Same thing for the provost. Faculty have their own process of doing things, and we don't want to interfere with that process. But we do want to inform like what needs to happen under Title IX. So we're a part of all of it, but the resolution process might look a little different. So if we have a contract with someone and we learn that someone in that population has caused harm to someone in our community, we're going to reach out to the leadership of that contract and discuss with them what's their process for resolution, but also what our needs are for resolution as a campus community. And lastly, folks are able to provide a report anonymously. And anonymously means that we don't, a name doesn't have to be attached to the reporter. Now, we do encourage folks to be as detailed as possible because a limited amount of information can a limited amount of information can reduce the effectiveness of what our intervention looks like. And we don't want folks to feel like we're not doing our part in things. We don't want folks to feel like, just because we didn't show up in this certain way, that we are we don't care, or that it appears that we don't care. And even that you know, that we don't want it to appear that we're just not doing anything. But for example, if we decide that, hey, you know, or if somebody reports that something happened in this particular department and we don't necessarily know what to do, or we don't know exactly who the person is, we can do something like a general intervention, and it might look like a training for a department. But if we know that it's a particular person in this department, that can be more specific intervention. That's not to say that if we get an anonymous report that we don't do anything or just kind of look at it with, but we go forth with what the information that we have. So we encourage folks to just be as detailed as possible so that way we have the most information and can do the most that we can with what we have. So this is what folks can expect a resolution process to look like. Now, again, depending on what population we're in, it's going to look a little different. But initially, Dr. Mazik is going to meet with the person who the report is submitted about. And then there's a Title IX assessment. This is where we are, or Dr. Mazik is assessing under the Title IX regulations what that looks like, or whether this qualifies as a Title IX matter for the Title IX process, or rather, if it looks like a non-Title IX matter, which the processes are almost the same, but they're different. Next is these supportive measures, and this is where we provide whatever the support looks like that's needed for the person in order for them to feel supported, for the person who's the reported or who the complaint is about. So the complainant is the name for the person who has submitted a complaint. The respondent is the person who is responding to the complaint. And then, depending on what population that we're in, there's an investigation that takes place, possibly a hearing or an administrative meeting. And then there's an opportunity for appeals. Now, there are certain qualifications for these appeals, but everyone has a right to appeal if they have grounds that support the qualifiers for the appeal. So these are just some examples of what supportive measures look like. This includes safety planning, referrals to different resources, whether that be on campus or in the community, administrative directives like no contact orders or persona non gratas, which are um, things like, or persona non grata is something referred to as the campus ban. So if someone needs to be removed from campus, we can talk about that then. And no contact orders when two people are no longer um, able to speak to each other directly by proxy, be it through friends, coworkers, colleagues, or via social media. It's not a gag order because remember, again, these are administrative directives. But if these things are violated, there are also resolutions for that as well, or processes for resolution for that as well. If anyone is interested in learning what a temporary protective order looks like, in Fulton County. We can talk with them about that. And we even have resources to help folks facilitate um, or help them to fill out the paperwork for a temporary protective order. And sometimes even offering representation at a 12-month hearing. If someone is interested in law enforcement or a criminal complaint, we can assist them with that as well. But also, we support folks who are engaging in an adjudication process. Everyone has a right to an advisor. And so if there is a matter, or there is a time that, say for if the student was about to go into the hearing, we can serve as that advisor capacity and make sure that their rights are supported and enforced. We talked about these already. These are confidential spaces on campus, meaning that if something is reported to these spaces, especially as it relates to the matters that we talked about, was policy violations, gender-based violence, those things, if those are shared in these spaces, then they don't have an obligation to report to us. Mandated reporters do, but confidential places do not. Not everybody, again, wants to engage with Title IX, or sometimes folks are not even very trusting or not even sure about what they should do next. So instead of coming to us directly, they may want to talk to some spaces that maybe feel more safe and more helpful to them. Other places that folks can report are public safety, and they are a partner who is supportive in safety measures for us. And we partner with them on a lot of different things. They will submit a report to our office, but again, if we get that information and the person doesn't want necessarily to reach out to Title IX or even engage with us, they don't have to, but we are obligated to reach out to them. And also, while we're here, there are instances where if something is reported and people don't necessarily want to engage with our office, but we're finding that there's a pattern, right? So maybe there's a respondent who has been mentioned in multiple cases. That's a pattern. And so we, as an office, may then say, hey, we don't necessarily think that this is the safest person to be on our campus, or this doesn't seem like a safe individual. We can take measures um, even without the person who is, even without the complainant, because now it's an issue for the broader community. It's a concern for the broader community. Off-campus jurisdiction is 911. We have worked with public safety to help us get in touch with the Atlanta Police Department, and they've been helpful to us as well. We don't often have folks who want to engage with 911, but we do have folks on public safety that help us to navigate, which department do we need to call? Do you know someone in this space that maybe we can connect with to maybe even talk this further through? If folks aren't thrilled with the way that an institution handles a resolution process or handles a case, they can speak with the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. So if somebody feels retaliated against or feels discriminated based on their sex, their race, their ethnicity, all these things, the Office of Civil Rights can then investigate um, how an institution handled a matter. They may not be looking at the complaint itself, but they're looking at how, for instance, Spelman went about the resolution process. So some Spelman initiatives that have come about are our VP&I program. And this is the program that Ms. Paula Dobbs is over and oversees. So in 2018, the college received the OVW Campus Grant. And this grant is for institutions who want to or need more resources to develop initiatives or resources or relationships to address gender-based violence in their community. So it's like a multidisciplinary team, meaning that multiple people on campus have representatives on this CCRT team or the Coordinated Community Response Team, because everybody has a different lens about how this shows up in their space. Housing has a different lens than religious life. Counseling services has a different lens than health services. Student representatives can share some things that's happening within the community that maybe we aren't even aware of. And of course, we provide the insight as it relates to what our office does. Some other partnerships that we have are folks that sit on the CCRT are the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation. And this is the organization that sometimes is able to provide representation for folks who are looking to find resolution through a temporary protective order. Partnership Against Domestic Violence is somewhat self-explanatory. They provide safe housing options for folks who don't feel safe at home. They serve both Fulton and Gwinnett counties. And they also have helped us with some outreach or educational initiatives and some education aspects to what we do. Another resource that's on here that isn't on here necessarily, but they are an integral part of what we do as it relates to the grant. Live Safe Resources is an organization that addresses both sexual violence and relationship violence. They offer safe housing for folks who no longer feel safe at home. And they also offer or have a sane exam room. So when folks have been harmed by sexual violence and they want a sexual assault examination, they have their own facility to do that. And it's more intimate than, say, if something were or an exam room or in like a hospital or in the emergency room, right? It's a very intimate form of harm, and you want to be mindful of the space that we're in or that they're in as they're navigating this trauma that's happened to them. Live Safe Resources is also our 24/7 crisis line organization. So if somebody on our campus has experienced some form of harm after hours, after 5 p.m., they're the number that we encourage folks to call in order to get the support that they need. And again, they address sexual violence and relationship violence, and they are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some of the things that the grant offers, or these are just examples of some of the programs that we've done via the grants. ABLF has come out and done tabling for Ask a Lawyer. So if somebody isn't, again, wanting to engage with us directly, but they have questions, there's tabling that's been offered. So folks can get that information, regardless if they meet with us or not. There's a survivor support group for folks who have been harmed but need some communal support, sometimes walking through or navigating a resolution process or just overcoming sexual assault or sexual violence or even relationship violence. You need support. It's not just a one moment when we're done. It's an ongoing recovery process. We do trainings with public safety. We also have peer educators who are students who are educated on how and what these policy violations are, but also what we can do to help folks. If somebody isn't comfortable coming to our office again, peer educators can provide the same information in their community, and they can get it from a student, another student, one of their colleagues, because they may feel more comfortable that way. These are just some examples of our annual programming. We've done a resource fair. We do stalking awareness campaigns, things like Donuts and Dating, where we're offering donuts and talking to students about what their non-negotiables are. And faculty and staff are welcome to attend as well. We don't shy away from food or sharing a donut here or there. We also address things like, well, we do spell safe training. We talked about that. But we also recognize and acknowledge certain days, awareness days. So National Coming Out Day, and making sure that students or everyone knows that we are available for everyone and not just a limited or a restricted group of people. We are here to serve the community, not just one particular population. With that said, that is the end of this training. Again, if you have found that you need some support, if you would just like to talk to someone, if you just need some, maybe you would like to be connected to one of the community partners, we can work with you on that. You can reach out to us at Title IX at spelman.edu, especially if you're not really sure who you want to engage with first. You can also follow us on Instagram or Twitter. We do post on Instagram pretty regularly. And I think we're developing a TikTok. Don't hold me to that, but we're working on it. And you'll see that on our Instagram or just social media overall, we're posting a lot of educational things, um, shining a light on certain topics. We're sharing when we're having these events, where we're having them, who's all invited. Um, and it's some good information just to have on your feed, especially if you're particularly interested in gender-based violence and what that information looks like, all the things, the awareness campaigns, the initiatives that Spelman is working on, or even just some other initiatives that are taking place outside of campus. We are available to you, so don't feel shy about approaching us. You can give us a call, you can walk in, and we're happy to meet with you, or you can make an appointment. Whatever it is, I just hope that you all have learned or at least ascertained that we are available to everyone who is within the Spelman community. And with that, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to spend some time with me in this What is Title IX? And I hope to see you around campus. Take good care.